Hello, I'm Paddy Delaney, and welcome to Integrated Infrastructure, a podcast dedicated to bringing you news and views from industry leaders involved in the development, design, construction and management of the many built forms that make up Australia's integrated infrastructure. This is the third podcast in the series and was recorded as the North Search series. Welcome back to the North Search series. This is where we give back to the construction, engineering, property and energy markets that we work with at North Search. I'm Paddy Delaney, the Managing Director of North Search, and this is a special edition of the podcast, a deviation from our current theme of leaders and mentors. And today I'm talking to Brent Crockford, who is the CEO of the Australian Owned Contractors. That's an organisation that represents Australian-owned mid-tier civil engineering contractors. I'm personally very interested to see how the next wave of major infrastructure project is going to be delivered in Australia. And when I found out about Brent's organisation, I reached out to him, and he has been kind enough to come on and talk to us today and tell us more about it. So, Brent, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Thank you, Paddy. Thank you for the opportunity, and great to be able to talk to your listeners as well as you.
Yeah, likewise. So, look, should we get straight into it and start with you? It'd be great to understand your background and how you became to be the CEO of Australian Owned Contractors.
Yeah, sure. My background is principally in politics and government relations, public affairs, and another word which is sometimes used, sometimes not, in lobbying. This opportunity emerged with some work that many I've worked closely within the industry, have been involved with AOC for a while, and they were refocusing, I suppose, and ramping up their efforts. An opportunity came to be the inaugural CEO of the organisation, with a particular focus on government relations and advocacy, which is our main reason of being.
Yeah, fantastic. And the organisation has been around for sort of about 18 months, is that right?
Yeah. Coming on a couple of years, and formed with a very strong nucleus of supporters, not surprisingly from Australian owned and controlled mid-tier contractors who were increasingly and still remain increasingly frustrated by some trends which no doubt we'll cover, but mainly the reliance, I suppose, and the concentration of large government publicly funded infrastructure projects being awarded to a small handful of foreign-owned Tier 1 contractors. And that's where the organisation came from, to sort of challenge that.
So, in a nutshell, describe the AOC and your mission.
Sure. So we're 15 members strong. I'm pleased to say that has been growing, and we're confident we'll continue to do so. And we represent, we're confident in saying, a large swathe of Australian-owned mid-tier contractors. Definitionally, Infrastructure Australia defined mid-tier as having the capacity for projects from about 200 million to 500 million, and that's where our members sit. My charge and our charge is really to use the statistics and use the public data to emphasise to government the consequences of their policy decisions if nothing changes. And at the moment, large bundled projects are still being put out to market, and they are not surprisingly being awarded to, as I mentioned, the same foreign-owned Tier 1 contractors. So we're pointing out that we think there's a better way for the government to do this, and that is to break up these large infrastructure projects, debundle them into more manageable or perhaps more properly put smaller and more competitive packages that would allow our members and allow mid-tier contractors in Australia to bid for them. And where governments can't do that for different reasons, put into these contracts a manner of thinking which is very strategic. So an industry capability criteria which allows public money and taxpayers' money to really reflect an investment in Australian-owned companies and to allow them to grow.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there are quite clearly there've been project blowouts for years and years. Whether that was on the desal plant in Victoria, and then the resources projects, and now I think we're starting to see that certainly in Sydney Metro, Melbourne Metro. And because of that, I think those top tier contractors are actually looking to make their profits on actually the sweet spot that your contractors are aiming to win projects between that $205 million dollar space. So not only are you not getting in on those top sort of projects, but you're also having to compete on the ones where the Infrastructure Australia says it is your space.
Paddy, that's exactly right. And one way it's been put to me more than one time is we're being squeezed from both ends, whereas the fairness playing field doesn't exist because we're able to successfully challenge those who put to us that tier one contractors aren't interested in this space because they are fighting aggressively, as they should in a competitive market, for packages much smaller than even some of our members would look at on a day-to-day basis. So it is a very highly pressurised field of those factors that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they compete extremely hard on early works where the projects aren't of great value, but the idea is you get in with the client, you get to know them, you understand what their issues are, and then gives you a more informed sort of opportunity to win the larger packages.
That's right. We think there's probably some more things to be said about that. And I take it back to the point that at the end of the day, governments are procuring these large projects for our benefit. But particularly when I look at the federal funding, which is increasingly a part of these packages, and rightly so, there's a view that to hand over the money and then sort of step back and not have much more interface with the project, we think that's quite an opportunity missed by the federal government. And that's why we're calling on them to really think strategically about infrastructure, particularly where our members are concerned with large transformative civil infrastructure projects, and really use their weight to bring about the best outcomes. And we would say having an Australian-owned contractor in the head contract and to be able to bid effectively for these opportunities is a really good outcome for the government.
Yeah, fantastic. So, how do you go about trying to achieve what your mission and influence people in the way that you're hoping to?
Yeah, Paddy, I can probably start off with a really good example that some of your listeners might be interested in just having a look at. And we've praised, in this case, it was Western Australia's Main Roads Department for a really innovative and good way of looking at this through their Bunbury Outer Ring Road package. It was a job about $840 million, I think, a large road, and as I said, around linking Bunbury. And in that expression of interest documentation, Main Roads, as an agency, of course, of the West Australian government, placed in that documentation their preference for a non-tier one to be involved in the head contract of that project. And that was really well supported by each of the tenderers in that. It's now at a shortlist stage, and I can share with you that as an outcome of that, an Australian-owned contractor will be involved in building that project, which we think is fantastic. Some being our members, some not, but we're really pleased with that outcome.
Yeah.
In terms of your question on how sort of we spearhead this, we're still of the strong view that while state governments and their infrastructure agencies have a large role to play, we do think that the federal government has the first role to play in showing leadership on this. And there's, through the formerly COAG, now National Cabinet process, the Transport and Infrastructure Council, which the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormick, chairs, there is some early thinking going on in this, but we'd like to see that perhaps like the investment of significant amounts of money being brought forward and a decision on that being sooner rather than later. So that's an example of some of the practical policy moves. But we know increasingly we're receiving a lot of support, particularly in this COVID and hopefully soon post-COVID environment. A bit of introspection on Australian supply chains, resilience and industry capability and sustainability more general. And it's keeping me and our members very busy. And channeling that by encouraging your members to reach out to their federal member of parliament to talk about this issue. Certainly visit our website, australianownedcontractors.com.au, and be involved in our LinkedIn page. And there's some more news and portals we're about to release to market. So in that, it's really going to be, we're going to be supported by community in really bringing this issue to a head, because it hasn't always been one of the sexiest issues or one of those front page issues, but it is really important for our industry and the way the Australian government thinks about supporting the civil construction industry going forward.
Yeah, fantastic. It's interesting. Since we spoke earlier in the week, I've been made aware that you're certainly not the only group of Australian companies that are trying to influence government at the moment. Certainly, I think that there's a group of Australian-owned building contractors that are also trying to do something similar through the Master Builders Association.
Yes.
And just after we were speaking the other day, I was, obviously very active on LinkedIn. It's a fantastic way for us to communicate with people. There were Australian government sort of advertisements talking about supporting local businesses and, support your local cafe, support your local restaurant. Well, this is no different, is it?
Correct, Paddy. And we're not asking for a handout or a leg up. We're just asking for a fair go. And we're asking for an even playing field when it comes to taxpayers' dollars on these projects. So that's where our focus is, large or major civil infrastructure that's funded mostly, in most parts, jointly by the federal and state governments, to be afforded a fair go. And within that, we think that governments of all levels should think a lot more strategically about their investments in this and what it does. You mentioned the supply chain there, and that's right. It's a particularly interesting time of reflection on that. And Master Builders and the Civil Contractors Federation have been saying some things we really support along this process. And I imagine this is going to find its way across our economy over the short to medium term. And we just want to make sure we're a large part of that in our bailiwick.
And for you, it's very much it's about being at the table, working with those top tiers, and being part of the conversation, as opposed to sort of suggesting that anybody should be muscled out or anything like that.
Yeah, that's quite right, Paddy. We support an active and vibrant market, and the Tier 1 foreign-owned contractors certainly have a large role to play in this. And we're about being afforded the same opportunities as them to win a place in the head contract of these projects. I should mention many of our members work closely with Tier 1 contractors and have many successful projects to show for it. But to be afforded this level playing field, we think is something governments, and particularly the federal government at this point, should look at very seriously.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, you're a very busy man, so I don't want to keep you for too long, but I really appreciate you coming on and having a chat to me today. Just to finish off, what are you excited about at the moment in terms of the opportunity going forward?
Yeah, I guess with not that I've personally seen many major international crises like this, health and economic one. But I guess the opportunities that come out of this to look at policy in both a high level and a granular way, and to actually have an honest conversation about what governments have been doing well, what's been working well and what hasn't. And I must say we've been afforded quite a good hearing, even across the state levels, which we're increasingly doing. So it would be unfair for me to characterise that governments of all levels are completely stubborn to this issue. We're actually receiving some moral support and some further thinking, but we're saying it's time to act. And I think what I'm excited about is the opportunity to have those honest conversations. I note they're happening in other places of the polity, and for companies and industry leaders to have a good say and really affect the outcome of public policy without being accused of trying to make an extra dollar or doing it at the expense of others. So that is the exciting part of these otherwise challenging times.
Fantastic. Well, look, wish you the very best in your endeavours, and we'll be keeping a close eye, and hopefully we might get a chance to have a chat again a bit further down the line, and get a chance to grab all these opportunities that are coming.
Thanks, Paddy. Thank you for your time, and all the best to your exclusive and great client list, and look forward to staying connected.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Integrated Infrastructure is powered by North Search, specialists in executive and technical search across engineering, design, construction, property and energy markets in Australia. If you'd like to find out more about North Search or get involved with this podcast, you can click on the links in the show notes or email me directly at the address on the screen. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Integrated Infrastructure. Please tell your friends and colleagues if you did, and we hope to see you again soon.